Welcome to another Apollo Papyrus podcast episode. I am Aaron Apollo Camp. For this episode, my interview guest is the author of the three-part Survivors of the Mutant Dawn series of post-apocalyptic novels. His name is Richard P. Stone, and my interview with Richard will follow the note-taking sounds. Richard P. Stone, welcome to the Apollo Papyrus podcast.
Thank you very much.
Feel free to introduce yourself to our listeners.
I'm Richard P. Stone. I've written three novels of kind of a different look at the post-apocalyptic dystopian type situation. 71 years old, formerly a basketball player overseas for 11 years, was a school teacher for 30 years. And a retired teacher, now working retail and on the side writing stories. So that's basically it.
You are the author of the Survivors of the Mutant Dawn series, which is a three-book post-apocalyptic series. Without spoiling too much of the first novel of the series, which is also called Survivors of the Mutant Dawn, what is that book about?
Well, basically it starts off in the future about 150 years from now and basically talks about the apocalypse that happens that basically sends the whole world into a tensy. Basically, a kind of a war between the mutants and the humans. Mutants were just starting to emerge, and so they decided they were going to bomb the world. And so the group of humans were able to, suspect what's going to happen and built a super bunker, and they went underground to try to survive. And it turned out to be not so easy. Actually, my first book I published was actually the second book I wrote. Is this whole thing, how the story happened, was kind of a neat little accident, I guess I would say. But it's a story that basically the whole series is based on a classic role-playing game back from the 80s, 70s, and 80s that I enjoyed running. And how the whole process came about was just kind of fate kind of got involved in that. So...
Yeah, when you talk about role-playing games in the 70s and 80s, those were tabletop board games because video games and computer games were in their infancy, and that was before you really had any kind of internet gaming community.
Yeah, right. And it was basically because of the video gaming that I was kind of presented a situation. Can I tell you how it all came about?
Sure.
Okay, I was an eighth grade teacher, and I had a homeroom, and this was about the time Lord of the Rings was about to come out. And I overheard the kids say, "Man, I can't wait for the new video game to come out. Going to be so cool." And I said, "Guys, you do realize they created a game based on Lord of the Rings about 25 years ago?" They said, "What's it called?" I said, "It's called Dungeons and Dragons." And they said, "What's that?" So I said, "Hold that thought." So I contacted my brother, who was the game master, had all his stuff. And he stopped playing. So I said, "Give me your stuff. I want to try something." So he gave me all this stuff. I rolled the kids up characters, took out one of the modules. 30 minutes every morning in homeroom, we'd play D&D. And the kids were just blown away. Like, my God, you can roll dice and use your imagination and have fun. So we did it for about 3 years. It worked out perfectly. A new principal comes in and says, "I want all teachers to have their own club." So I went, "Cool, I got mine." So a new AP came in and says, "Do you have a new club?" I said, "I sure do." He says, "Well, tell me about it." And I said, "Well, it's a role-playing game. It's team strategy, critical thinking, out-of-the-box thinking. It's math. It's science." "Oh, my God, it's amazing. What's it called?" I said, "Well, it's called Dungeons and Dragons." They said, "You can't do it. We cannot use it. People worship Satan over it. People killed each other over it. Tom Hanks went crazy in a movie over it." So he said, "Take it to the principal." So I go to the principal. I do the whole spiel there. She falls in love with it, but never asked me for the name. So I tell her, "I have to tell you the name." And I told her, and she said, "You can't do it. We're not allowed to have that at our school." So I said, I don't have anything. She says, well, do you have a game that's like Dungeons and Dragon that is not Dungeons and Dragon? And it just so happened that when my brother, we used to play back in the 70s and 80s, my brother was a dungeon master. Sometimes he'd say, you know what? I don't want to be dungeon master. I want to play too. Well, nobody wanted to pick up the mantle of being dungeon master. It's too much to read, too much to prepare for. So I went to the store and I found a game that the same company that made D&D was coming out with different genres of role-playing games. And one of them was a post-apocalyptic game called Gamma World. So I would start running some Gamma World games and we just had a ball with it. So, of course, life gets in the way. Everybody gets married. Everybody moves. Everybody has a different part of life. So everything kind of got tabled. So I said, well, I do have this other game. She says, run with that. So this time I used my school computer to put all the kids' characters on my computer. And after we'd play every morning, I would put down in their history what happened to their characters. And after a while, I started seeing a story was starting to form. So I started writing. That was it. So I tried it at first. And I mean, writing is not easy. Putting a story on paper is easy. Putting a story on paper properly is not easy. And so I had to learn through the ropes and stuff like that. I switched schools and I was about to give up. I was just like, this is getting to be too hard. I just don't know how I'm going to do this. So I met a librarian there that loved science fiction. So I asked her, I said, would you edit my story for me? And she looked at me, she goes, I ain't editing crap. And I went, oh, sorry, no, my bad. She said, but I will read it. And I said, okay. So I printed out 3 chapters. I put it on her desk. I walked by. 4 days in a row, I keep passing by her room. That folder never moved. And I said, that's it. I'm hanging it up. I can't do this anymore. So over the weekend, I was athletic director. I came back early Monday morning to wash football uniforms. And I went all the way in back of the school when it was dark and early. And she was there clutching the folder like, crap, I need more of this. And I said, are you serious? She goes, yeah. And that was it. I mean, the words just started flying out of my hands when I got on the keyboard. So I finished it. And she said, you know, what's really interesting is, how did all this start? Well, the second book I published is actually the first book I wrote. I started writing another part. And originally they were both together in the same book, but I met an editor, Don Greenfield Ireland, who's a very successful author, playwright, and things like that. She told me I had 2 books, so I separated them. So the first book is the second book I wrote, and it was the only book I put into a book festival, the Hollywood Book Festival, and I got runner-up for science fiction division. So the rest is history.
I seem to remember interviewing Dawn Greenfield Ireland for this podcast. I don't know if I've uploaded the episode featuring my interview with her yet, but if I haven't already, I will do that. I'm going to move on.
She's a very engaging lady. She and I mean, she took me under her wing, and basically, I call her my boss, and we still stay in contact. We have our writer's critique that we have with another friend of ours. So anybody out there thinking about writing, I strongly recommend writer's critiques.
There's 2 other books in the Survivors of the Mutant Dawn series, Mutated Lands and Survivors in the Mutated Lands. Without spoiling too much about both of those novels, what are each of those about?
Well, the second book, Mutated Lands, basically picks up on the main characters of the story, which are basically written about those 8th graders that played the game. And so these characters have an 8th grade attitude, kind of a very young, immature type attitude. The future has been totally wiped out. I mean, the history of the world's totally wiped out. And it's 900 years later that everything starts happening. Now, in the first book, there's one character in all the books. And the funny story about him, I was originally planning on killing him off and making kind of a heroic death. But my editor said, no, don't do that. He's my favorite character. And I said, are you serious? She goes, hey, if you take this guy out, nobody's going to read your books. So it kind of percolated in my head some ideas about his storyline. So I kept him in. Sure enough, when I talk to people who read my books, I ask, who's your favorite character? They say Marty. That guy's my favorite. So that's kind of funny how that panned out. But the second book talks about basically the first book. In order for the humans to survive the 900 years, they have to make a very drastic decision to survive there. Once they're there, Now they're looking for people who match their DNA that they can basically put their brains in to keep living their life. So they started invading all these small villages around the area. In the second book, characters hear of the rumor of people invading a certain area and found out that the kingdom there is giving away rewards such as gold, such as land and position. So they decide they're going to go check it out. And they have to travel from uh, Alabama, you know, post-apocalyptic Alabama, all the way up to post-apocalyptic Minnesota area, kind of like the driftless area. So they have an adventure going all the way up to that, and then the third book, Survivors of the Mutated Lands, they get right at the cusp of it and have some challenges before they get into the land. And my fourth book that I just finished we'll talk about them being inside that land and what they're trying to do to solve the mystery there.
Did you do any world building for your novels, given that it's set in a post-apocalyptic society? And if so, what was that like?
World building, I've tried to figure out what a society would be that completely forgot about their history. They know nothing about the past. All they have are these ancient relics, ancient destroyed buildings that they don't understand what they are exactly or how they got there, but that they're just there. And of course, you can imagine it's kind of like the Black Ages, the feudal system, where the thinking is the ruler rules the land and people just get in line. People just want to survive. People want to form communities for protection and things like that. It's kind of a world building thing that you can imagine that basically that's what would happen if we get into that situation. I also try to keep it to where there's a lot of different dangers in it, not only mutated animals and wildlife and people, but also computers and robots that's run by a very I wouldn't say mutated, but an AI that was generated by the mutants to put into the HoloNet instead of the internet. It was a HoloNet that controls other machines to become more like entities against humans and things like that. And then there's radiation zones and things like that. So there are hazards there that you got to figure out. Then you got to figure out, okay, if they come across some communities, what kind of communities are there? Most of them are going to be simple villages. Some of them are going to be small towns. And some of them are going to be a big town, but they went back to building walls around their territory to keep the bad people out or the people they don't want out. So I'm kind of building as I'm going along. And so far, people seem to enjoy what I'm writing.
Are all of your novels independently, traditionally, or hybrid published, or did you use different publishing methods for each of your novels?
Say again?
Are all your novels independently, traditionally, or hybrid published, or did you use different publishing methods for each of your novels?
Basically, I'm just sticking with Amazon. I did Smashwords for my ebooks. And basically Amazon is where I'm publishing right now. So it's kind of publish on demand. I've thought about, coming out with a hardback, thought about doing a, large print and things like that. But, I kind of had told myself I'm going to do that if I become a little bit more successful and I get more income in that allows me to do that kind of stuff.
What is the best advice that you could offer to anyone who is considering writing post-apocalyptic and or dystopian fiction?
I think that, right now we see all this dystopian movies and TV shows and things like that. And most of them deal with 100 years or within 100 years or, 200 years of the Great Holocaust. So it's basically talking about mankind coming out of the ashes and trying to survive. I went a step further. I went 900 years in the future because you got to figure, okay, yeah, we expect and we've seen everything about, this people coming out of the blast and trying to survive. course, a lot of people like to throw in zombies. They want to put zombies in everything, which there's nothing wrong with that. But I kind of took a different turn on that. So I think that you have to have an idea of what kind of story you want to tell. I would recommend, if kind of imagine what the world would be like 100 years after an apocalypse, 200, 300, 400, 500 years. Because, don't forget, I believe the Dark Ages were like in 1000 AD, and then the feudal system went through the 1400s, 1500s, and you can see the develop of mankind as that. And I think you should use that as a model, thinking that, you know what, life's not going to be the same all the time. It's going to evolve and it's going to get better. So, what they say, invention's the mother of necessity.
You mentioned this briefly in your introduction, and I'll go back to this for the final question in this interview. An interesting fact about you is that you played basketball in Puerto Rico. So you did play basketball overseas, but you never actually left the United States to do so, because Puerto Rico is a U.S. territory.
No, I didn't.
During the 1970s.
It is, but there's an ocean between us.
Yeah, during the 1970s and 1980s. What was that experience like?
Oh, man. It was incredible. I mean, I had to play on some basketball courts that had chicken wire from the ground floor all the way up to the ceiling to keep people from throwing things out on the court. I've gone through a few riots to where fans are not happy what they're seeing and they start tearing the place up. I had one game, a home game. We were playing against a very good team with the leading scorer of the league, and one of our fans ran up and grabbed his 3-year-old in the crowd and ran off with him. Of course, his wife started screaming bloody murder. That whole team started climbing a 12-foot fence that separated them from the court, and they're diving into the crowd having a big fight. I've been through a playoff game where somebody with a knife started slicing up some of our fans behind our bench. It's never a dull moment in Puerto Rico. I will say that. I'm half Puerto Rican. My mother's Puerto Rican, so I do have family there and stuff like that. Puerto Rican are the most giving people, they live life to the fullest. And they make sure that you enjoy it too while you're there. And if they like you, boy, they take you in, you're taken care of. If you start being belligerent and start acting like you're better than them, that's going to be a very tough time to deal with. So Puerto Rico was kind of like, in the 70s in Puerto Rico was kind of like the NBA was in the 40s and 50s in the United States. A lot of small towns. Puerto Rico is only 100 miles long, 30 miles wide. So a lot of rivalries, very contested game, very competitive and things like that.
Richard, thank you for appearing on the Apollo Papyrus podcast. You were an amazing and interesting guest to interview. Richard, thank you for appearing on the Apollo Papyrus podcast. You were an amazing and interesting guest to interview.
I'm honored to be here. Thank you very much for having me. And anybody out there planning on writing, keep on writing.
The end of this episode marks the halfway point of season 9 in terms of number of episodes uploaded this season, but definitely not in terms of upload date. As regular listeners of this podcast are aware of, I have been unusually slow getting podcast episodes uploaded this season, and I've mentioned my health issues as a reason for that. However, there is another reason as to why I've been slow in getting episodes uploaded this season, and that is because of ongoing technical glitches with the computer files that contain the recordings of my interviews with guests on this podcast. This episode proved especially troublesome in getting produced due to technical difficulties. When Zoom, the conferencing program I use to record interviews for this podcast, generates audio files for each of my interview recordings, it generates 3 different recordings for each interview. One for my audio feed as the host, one for the guest's audio feed, and a third pre-mixed audio feed containing both my audio and the guest's audio. In the past, I've been able to simply use the pre-mixed audio feed that Zoom generates in my audio editing program, which is a free open source audio editor called Audacity. However, in doing so, I've started encountering a problem in which Audacity would erroneously list the hard drive on my laptop being full, despite the fact that tens of gigabytes of free space on the hard drive exists and has existed the whole time. This glitch would cause Audacity to crash and fail to compact the project file as soon as I tried to close the program. After spending weeks trying to fix what I initially thought was an issue with Audacity, I decided to try using the separate host and guest audio feed that Zoom generated for this episode and mix the two in Audacity instead of using the pre-mixed interview feed that Zoom generates. Believe it or not, the problem I had been having completely went away, so the problem was actually a glitch with the pre-mixed interview audio feed that Zoom generates that was causing Audacity to crash, not a glitch with Audacity itself. Going forward, I will be mixing the separate host and guest audio feeds of my interviews when doing post-interview production work on each of my interview episodes, and this will be the first episode in which I am doing that as a regular practice. Furthermore, the remaining episodes of Season 9 will be uploaded throughout the rest of this month, February, March, and April, with the Season 10 premiere episode being uploaded in the first week of May. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding y'all to find your writing and reading purpose. Bye for now. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of our audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this podcast episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.